Another way that you can present the results from your research is using a presentation instead of a report. Oral presentations are used to summarize the entire research process in a short time. They take a lot of planning because you have to actually condense months of research to summarize it in usually less than 20 minutes. Often the results must be presented to people who have not read the report or have only skimmed it. It's a task of the presenter to make sure that the audience is able to understand the research process and also be convinced of the recommendations made. To maintain the interest of the audience, different visual aids can be used. It's common to use a slide deck, usually a PowerPoint, to organize the report. In order to deliver the most effective presentations, you need to put effort into deciding on what content you want to present and how to present it. That's your visual aid. Also, you need to put focus onto how to deliver the presentation. That means practicing is very important, and we're going to discuss these 4 stages next, that you need to decide on your content, create the visual aid, which is your PowerPoint, conduct the presentation, and finally, presentations that end with a question and answer period that you also must be prepared for. How do you know what goes into your presentation? In a presentation that's only 20 minutes or less, there's not enough time to go into detail about every aspect of the research process. Instead, the presenter must decide on what important points to focus on. You need to ask yourself, what are the most important parts of the researcher that I would want the listener to remember? Some of the obvious points that must be included in the presentation are the problem that you're investigating, the results, and conclusions. Usually the design aspects of the research, like detailed data collection methods or your sampling methods, or really complicated data analysis, are not put in extreme detail because this would be too technical for most audiences. For a general research presentation, an outline you can follow is to first start with a title page. Give your research project a title and also introduce yourself. Number 2, the research problem. Tell the audience your topic, objective, and research questions. Then you move into the conceptual background. Introduce the key facts you learned from your literature review. Then the methods. What primary methods did you use to collect your data? What sampling techniques were used to select respondents? You can discuss this in a general manner. You don't have to go into extreme detail for most presentations. Number 5 would be that you present your results. What were the results of the data analysis? This could include tables, charts, and calculations. Recommendations come after that. So how do you interpret those results? Do you have any recommendations based on the results? Were you able to answer your research question? Do you have recommendations for further research if you were not able to obtain concrete answers? And finally, you can conclude with acknowledgments. Recognize those that helped with the research process and thank your audience as well. The presentation will also heavily depend on who the audience is. Just like how you write conclusions and how you write a report also depend on the audience. If the audience is a group of business people, you'd want to focus on recommendations for making the best business decisions. However, if the audience was a group of statisticians or researchers, you would likely go into more detail about the design of the study and methods used. You need to be willing to adjust your content so that it suits the audience. To summarize, my top tip is to ask yourself these questions before starting your presentation. Who is the audience? What does the audience need to know? And how can we best communicate what we need to know? This will allow you to determine if you should follow this general structure or if you need to go into more detail in certain areas. So after you've decided on your content, which was step 1, you need to create the visual aid. The visual aid is an object that helps to focus the audience's attention and understand the content. Usually we use slide decks created in Microsoft PowerPoint. These can include text, charts, and tables. There are many different tips for creating slides, but some really quick key ones are that you should always only have one message per slide. Do not put too much content on the slides or too many ideas, just one message for each slide. Slides should always have 6 or fewer objects. This means 6 or fewer bullet points, or maybe like 4 bullet points and a couple pictures. You should not have many objects per slide. The less writing, the better. You can use contrast in color and in even fonts and size to help focus attention. So brighter colors and larger sizes will focus attention of the audience. Always use point form on your slides. You don't want to have full sentences while you're also speaking at the same time. And use backgrounds and text that are easy to read, like white background, black text, or the opposite. I will provide an example review of a presentation for my smoke-free data example that you can review for these components. After you've created the presentation slides, you conduct the presentation. What are some tips for conducting the presentation? Most importantly, you must be prepared. Practice is the best way to make sure you can remain calm and collected while presenting. Some important tips during the presentation include make eye contact with the audience, speak audibly so that people can understand you, pay attention to nonverbal cues from the audience so you can detect if they're bored or do not understand. Stick to the time frame and do not go over. So if you only have 10 minutes, you cannot exceed that time. Stick to the main points of interest, dress neatly, and be confident. You are the one that conducted the research. You will know it best, so you should be confident in your knowledge and skills. This presentation is just to tell others what you have found. After you've conducted everything and it's time to share your results with the audience, be excited to share your work. And remember that practice makes perfect, so you can be confident and present successfully. And the final step is the question period. Time is usually specifically allocated for an audience to answer questions. It's very important to be prepared to answer questions because, when conducted correctly, the question and answer session should leave the audience with a sense that they were somehow involved and that they are satisfied with the research process. Some tips to answer questions include answering with confidence because you are the expert on your research. Don't be defensive when people ask questions that you're not sure of or they find fault with your research. Be open to suggestions, especially if there are ideas for additional research or other recommendations that you could implement. It's important you approach these with an open mind. Also, if somebody asks a question or has a suggestion that you know is flawed and doesn't align with what you did in your research, you should always address these questions in a non-judgmental fashion. This can almost all be summarized by saying to acknowledge all ideas graciously. That is the best way to conduct the question-answer session. So after you've conducted your research and prepared the presentation materials, your presentation is where you'll actually deliver what you have prepared, and it will always conclude with a question-answer session where you can answer more in-depth questions on the research process.